With that, I'll turn it over to the ranking member, Senator Britt, for opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am looking forward to serving alongside you on this important committee. I also want to thank Chair Murray and Vice Chair Collins for your leadership. Ensuring that we do everything possible to get back to regular order is of the utmost importance, and we're proud to be a part of it. And I also appreciate the opportunity to serve in this capacity. Vice Chair Collins, thank you. Mr. Secretary, I appreciate you testifying today on fiscal year 2024 budget request for the Department of Homeland Security. First, I'd like to recognize the hard work of the men and women of the department, from protecting our borders to safeguarding cyberspace and critical infrastructure, from responding to natural disasters to guarding our coastlines and keeping Americans safe as they travel by planes, buses, and rails. DHS plays a critical role in securing our nation, keeping families safe, and communities strong. Additionally, I am proud of the work that is performed throughout the great state of Alabama for the department. While I have the utmost respect for the tens of thousands of DHS agents, officers, and employees who work tirelessly to protect our nation, I am very concerned about the many homeland security policies of this administration, particularly when it comes to the border. These policies have not just budgetary cost, but human cost as well. I have seen little pairs of shoes at the border and know that those children have a story. I have seen a baby shivering wet after being carried across the Rio Grande. I have looked into CBP officers' eyes as they tell me about pulling a woman pregnant with twins out of the water after she drowned. Sadly, this administration's budget proposal doubles down on failed policies that encourage these kinds of tragedies to happen every day. At a time when we are facing unparalleled threats both at home and abroad, President Biden's Department of Homeland Security-based budget actually calls for a cut of $650 million, or nearly 1% of your fiscal year 2023 funding. It is one of the only departments subject to a decreased budget request, and it begs the question: how can President Biden expect anyone to believe he is serious about enforcing our nation's immigration laws, preventing the exploitation of children, stopping bad actors in cyberspace, keeping Americans safe as they travel, stemming the flow of fentanyl, which killed a record number of Alabamians and Americans last year? And the candid answer is he cannot. Let's start with securing our border and enforcing the laws. In fiscal year 2022, there were around 2.4 million encounters along the southwest border, and this does not include the over 500,000 gotaways that evaded arrest last year. We are on pace to see similar levels in FY23 and will likely break the record given the end of Title 42 usage in May. In fact, Mr. Secretary, your own department projects that when Title 42 goes away, we could see monthly encounter levels of nearly 400,000, a 150% increase over the historically high levels we see now. But President Biden's budget request for Customs and Border Protection is a decrease of $1.3 billion, and his plan has as many gaps in it as the wall that this administration refuses to finish. President Biden's budget seeks to hire just 350 additional Border Patrol agents to address the expected surge of migrants. At the same time, it is hiring 87,000 new IRS agents. I have traveled to the border 3 times in just the first 2 months of my time here in the Senate, and I can tell you that reducing resources for border security is not the way to go. And that's just the border. What about immigration enforcement in the interior of the country? Because of this administration's policies, there are nearly 600,000 migrants who arrive in the United States within the past 2 years who were subject to removal but did not receive charging documents, and in some cases will be waiting more than a decade, more than 10 years, just to begin their formal removal process. That doesn't even include the years that they will have to wait to actually go through the removal proceedings, and many of these people here illegally will get lost in the wind. Some commit a crime, some maybe worse. Despite the legal requirement to detain migrants facing removal, yet again, President Biden's budget requests fewer resources for detention beds and alternatives to detention. In fact, this administration seeks to decrease the budget for immigration and customs enforcement by nearly $500 million, a clear indication the president is not serious about enforcement. I can only imagine what impacts these proposed cuts to Customs and Border Protection and Immigration and Customs Enforcement have on morale. Finally, we cannot talk about the border crisis without talking about fentanyl. In 2021, there were over 105 Americans, including more than 1,000 Alabamians, that died from drug overdoses, predominantly due to fentanyl. Fentanyl is now the leading cause of death of Americans between the ages of 18 and 45. I want to commend the brave men and women of CBP, ICE, and the U.S. Coast Guard who are on the front lines every day to interdict fentanyl and other illicit drugs. But the numbers are alarming. For all of fiscal year 2022, they seized 14,700 pounds of fentanyl. That is enough fentanyl to kill every single American. Less than halfway through the fiscal year 2023, CBP has nearly matched that number, and we are on pace to double last year's fiscal totals. However, as my colleague from West Virginia pointed out in her recent floor speech, President's budget, fentanyl is actually only mentioned twice, but climate is mentioned 148 times. In fact, President Biden's budget request includes only $300 million for fentanyl detection equipment at CBP and $40 million for ICE operations to combat fentanyl trafficking. And $40 million is nothing when you compare it to $60 million that this administration spends each year on doing laundry for those migrants. And this total pales in comparison to President Biden's ask of $4 billion for ambiguous, ill-defined initiatives in FEMA's budget that have no actual bearing on the federal government's ability to respond swiftly and compassionately when counties in my home state like Dallas, Elmore, Greene, Morgan, Sumter are ravaged by tornadoes and storms. I cannot emphasize enough that we must make real and lasting impacts so that we can stop the cartels, stop the manufacturers of precursors, and stop the senseless deaths of Americans due to fentanyl. There are many other issues for us to discuss in your budget, from different things, TSA pay raise to inadequate operational funding for the U.S. Coast Guard to proposed cuts in how law enforcement teams get trained at DHS. But as a mom, I am especially concerned with the department's proposed cuts to school safety programs. Horrific tragedies, acts of pure evil, like the ones we saw this week in Nashville, are heartbreaking. Reminders that we have a lot of work to do. We must do that work together in a bipartisan way to keep our children safe, to protect their lives, to protect their opportunity to live the American dream. Mr. Secretary, the department does important work in this area. However, the president's budget seeks to cut funding for the school safety work done by both the National Threat Assessment Center and the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. For the third year in a row, the Biden administration has submitted a budget that does not make a serious effort to solving the vast problems of which the Department of Homeland Security has direct purview. I look forward to having a robust, thoughtful discussion today and beyond on these critical issues and other things as we work together to solve the problems that are before us. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the opportunity and look forward to the hearing.